For any of the builders that are listening right now, I'm sure many of them are saying, listen, nobody asked me about this stuff. Nobody ever comes to me and asks me to build a healthy home. They're not worried about this or not that. I understand that. But keep in mind that maybe you've never gotten a phone call about this asking because the potential customers already know that you don't do it and you're not even open to it. And so once you do it, and once you say to yourself, this is not rocket science, it can be done fairly easily. Just listen to the right people and use the right materials and take your time with the educational process. They're finding a whole new market of customer base that they never had before.
Today on the Curious Builder Podcast, we had Andy Pace on from the Green Design Center. And wow, we could have talked for a whole series, years and years of content here. One of the things that intrigued me the most was the difference between healthy building and energy efficiency. Andy's a 33-year veteran of understanding how our health is affected by the products we choose and in the homes that we live in. So without further ado, here's Andy Pace. Welcome to the Curious Builder Podcast. I'm Mark Williams, your host. Today, I am joined by Andy Pace from the Green Design Center. Welcome, Andy.
Thank you, Mark. Great to be here.
I was asking you beforehand, like, which one of your 8 businesses do you want me to introduce you as? Because you're also a healthy home concierge, healthy building expert, the podcast, Non-Toxic Environments. You're a Renaissance man.
Yeah, they call me one of those serial entrepreneurs.
Oh, I thought you were going to go with serial killer, but
No,
thanks for clarifying that.
Sometimes the mind starts to go, but no, honestly, I've been at this for so long, and it seems like I've had to reinvent myself many times over the years. But we've always stayed on mission, which is it's all about healthy home, common sense building materials.
I love it. I was doing the cheat code on guesting knowledge beforehand and listening to some of your other podcasts, and I feel like, man, I can't wait to tune into your podcasts. One of the biggest things, just this non-toxic home building. I think my lead-in question, and maybe I should stop for a second for the audience. We'll probably break this into 3 different segments, roughly 20 minutes each. But the first will be obviously who you are, what you do, why it's important. I think one of my lead questions after we get through that is healthy building versus energy efficiency. I feel like you can almost have the entire podcast be about that, frankly. And then maybe towards the end, as I mentioned before we came on air, is I'm actually in the middle of designing my first spec home in 16 years. And I'm really designing it around a philosophy that centers, and it's way beyond my knowledge base, which is your wheelhouse, is really just healthy living. And so we'll use my own ignorance of really just asking questions that basically, because I'll actually use what you tell me right now on this home that I'm doing. So I think just setting it up for how this podcast will probably be broken into.
Sounds fantastic. Looking forward to it.
Let's start. Just, I want you to give us a quick intro. You've been doing this for 33 years. And just tell us a little bit about your company and where you find yourself and why you're still doing it. 33 years is no joke. You're a veteran.
Thank you. Yes. And sometimes the age starts to creep up on me and then I get excited about it all over again. This is such an exciting industry to be in. It's never been like this. It has
probably
been
because you have more support now than you've ever had. The Green, maybe walk us through. You started in 92. I'm 44, so I was 12 years old when you started. And I bring
Thanks,
it up.
Mark.
You're welcome. No, but the reason I bring it up for context, just for context for the audience, is really we've been hearing about there's greenwashing, there's actual green principles, and at this point, no one even knows what they're even talking about anymore.
Sure.
Whether a company says they're green or not. That everyone's like, great, I'll buy it because it's got a green leaf on it. They don't know any of the back end practices. And I know that you'll be able to speak to us a little bit about that. What's interesting, it went from being this taboo, weird thing to now it's a dominant market force.
Right.
But yet, is it really? Anyway, I'll give you the floor to give us that evolution. Because right now, I guess I'll add one thing. I find that in my 20 years of building, so I started in 2005, I very rarely when I ask clients if they're willing to spend the money or if they're interested in it, almost exclusively. And usually I've gone with energy efficiency, not home health, which is why I'm particularly excited to talk to you because I think it's my messaging that has been wrong. But very rarely are they willing to spend the money on it unless there's a financial returns, unless they had some sort of allergic, like a health reaction, violently ill to a certain toxin. Then obviously they're aware of it. They're usually the ones informing us as the builder. But now I feel like the younger generation, they've been hearing green, not only efficiency, but I think we're in a real huge swing towards health, which I certainly hope because I'm a huge fan of just wellness. And I feel like the younger generation is going to be way more like this is going to be expected. And so I'd like to just, with that kind of shape from my perspective, I'm curious to see if it's accurate or not. And I'll give you the space.
All those different topics that you pointed out there, I can sum it up in the history of my existence in this business. I started in commercial construction architecture back in 1989, and I just got out of school. My family has owned a commercial construction material supply company since that dates back to the 30s. I get out of school, I start working for the family business, and a few years after I started, I find myself just, head into architectural specification writing. I am traveling the country, meeting with the largest architectural engineering firms, helping them detail materials in their projects, writing specifications for these projects. I spent 2 years as the youngest president of the Construction Specifications Institute local chapter. And I loved it. I loved the industry. We had a situation on a project in Milwaukee where we specified and supplied a water-based epoxy coating for a below-grade parking structure. Now, this is 1992. Everybody thought water-based meant it's safe, don't worry about it, they've taken all the junk out. So we got it specified. Our crew, they were applying the primer coat to this three-coat system, and people started calling down to the job trailer complaining because this is a below grade structure with 13, 14 floors of condos and offices above. Occupants were calling, complaining of the odors, saying that it's really strong. They have to leave their condos or their offices. We thought some people just complain because they see a can that opens up and they instantly go to something's bothering me. And I didn't know anything about sensitivities and sick building syndrome and all that. I was a neophyte when it came to that stuff. So we continue on the project, and now we actually run into serious issues. First of all, a sitting United States senator's office called and said, now Senator so and so cannot be down here. You got problems. And then three of our workers were rushed to the hospital because of inhalation complications. They could not breathe. Literally the curing process of this coating was causing all the oxygen in the room to be sucked out. And now we are scared. And I'm young in this industry. I'm 21, 22 years old. And I'm thinking I'm going to ruin my family's 60 plus year existence in this business by selling this lousy coating. What's going on? So, bunch of searching. We found a company in California, a very small company called AFM, American Formulating and Manufacturing. And they made products that were designed for people with sick building syndrome or environmental illness. And somebody told me they got something that'll work for this. Call them. I did call them. We worked it out. We finished the project. And then the wheels started turning in my head. And those were, I don't want to risk my family's business, number one. Number two, more importantly, I don't want to poison people. Here I am selling products that I thought were safe. The industry thought were safe. So why would I continue to sell these materials? And it's just like the light bulb went on, and it was just this epiphany. We have got to focus on selling human friendly, common sense building materials. And so over the next several years, I put together a series of flooring materials and countertops and cabinetry and paints and coatings and cleaning materials and HVAC systems and you name it, anything that could be healthier for the occupant. Now, remember, at this time or early on, I was focusing on commercial construction. And I had friends who were principals in large firms, and I would go to them and say, "You should really specify this AFM product because you're not gonna have people complaining about chemical odors." And they would say to me, "Well, stick this in the file in case anybody's ever interested in that stuff." And then a few years later, when the United States Green Building Council started, and a couple years after that, when they created the LEED program, then it became an issue of, do your products meet the LEED standard for energy efficiency and or sustainability from a global sustainability standpoint? It completely missed the boat when it came to human health. It just bypassed it. And so while I was involved in those organizations, I sat on the board of the USGBC here in Wisconsin. I co-wrote the Green Built Home Standards here in the state. But we found that the industry completely sped off in a direction of energy efficiency and sustainability, recycled content, all that stuff, which is important, of course, but it ignored the human health aspect. And we stuck true to our nature, which is let's provide materials that are healthier for the occupants.
Wow. Where do you find yourself now in terms of, you said now you're in a world and a time where you probably feel way more supported. There's a lot more
Sure.
colleagues. There's a lot more awareness of it. Where do we find ourselves now? I remember when lead was a big thing
Mhm.
in the late 90s, early 2000s, as I recall. And now I don't see or hear, and I'm not in commercial, so I don't know if it's still prevalent there, but residential, at least it doesn't seem to be big here. We have something called the Green Path in Minnesota, but I think it's most of the stuff that I'm being educated on with our building CU credits and things like that have to do with energy efficiency.
Right.
And Minnesota has been one of the top. I actually think we are the top at scale. Nobody builds more efficient homes than Minnesota does at
Mhm.
scale, but that's because of we're in a northern climate. You're in
Sure.
Wisconsin, so you'd be
Mhm.
somewhat similar. But that doesn't speak to home health, which is
Right.
obviously one of the things I mainly want to talk about here today.
When you got started in the business and you said mid 2000s, that was at basically I would call the zenith of the green building industry. This is where everybody was focusing on lead, on green from a standpoint of energy efficiency, global environmental concerns. Greenwashing was at its peak, where every manufacturer on earth was trying to talk about how green their products were. For instance, somebody could say, "We make our products all local. It's all locally made." They don't tell you from parts made in China or from toxic additives. They'll just say it's made locally, therefore
Can
it's
you imagine?
green. Oh,
Can you
yeah.
can you imagine if they sold green treated plywood and green treated 2x4s as a green product? The amount of chemicals and that stuff has got to be
Mhm.
out of this world.
Back then, though, it was the Wild West, and manufacturers could say and do anything they want. And then late 2000s, early two teens, the recession hits. Now, at the time, I was distributing the Safeco products to about 150 stores across the country, small little green supply stores. And within the next 3 to 5 years, we lost 80% of those stores because of they couldn't make it. All the money went out of construction, residential construction, and all those customers over the last several years who really started focusing on green from a standpoint, "Hey, I'm gonna do my part to save the earth," really well intended, went out of the market, and they came back in later on, mid-2000 teens, and they said, "I still wanna buy green, however, there needs to be more of a focus on it improving either my bottom line or or it improves the health of the occupants of the home." And that's when I started seeing the switch from I think we all understand energy efficiency. None of us go to Home Depot to buy a new wash machine and ask the salesperson, can you show me the least efficient wash machine you got? We all understand energy efficiency saves money. So that's a no brainer. But now you have people walking into those stores saying, "Do you have any, like, dishwashers that don't use a bituminous coating because when it heats up, it releases a toxic gas?" Those questions are now starting to happen
You see, and you
because of the I think people are finally realizing that our homes are potentially dangerous, and I think now in the last 4 years, because of COVID and people really focusing on their health, obviously, they're spending more time indoors. The thought process is now, coming full circle. It's coming complete now. We're saying, if we're going to do something in this house, we should probably do something that's not going to harm the occupants. It still has to maintain our budget and our aesthetic and our time frame, but it's gotta be healthier.
And I think for a long time, people have been talking about health forever, as
Mhm.
long as humans have been alive to some degree. But I feel now the word wellness seems to be a word that is used a ton,
Sure.
whether it's health and fitness and exercise, running, lifting weights, whatever that
Mhm.
might be. And we often look at nutrition and what we eat as you are what you eat, or a balanced diet. I have 3 young kids. We're obviously trying to teach them the merits of a healthy, balanced meal.
Mhm.
But I don't think I've ever in my entire life, and I just mentioned this recently, which is why this is so fortuitous that you're on, is no one talks about what we breathe.
Right,
Not at least not in my world.
right.
And like I do a lot of running. An athlete. I do ultra running. So obviously my VO2 max and my lungs are very important to me because I can't run the distances I run without a healthy lung system. But what's amazing to me is how amazing our body is at
Yeah.
filtering stuff. And so
Mhm.
we've been breathing this stuff unaware, but like our lungs, and I'm not saying that it's not in there, but it's like most people are unaffected. Like we tend to be a pretty reactionary society. Like until there's a problem, we tend not to do much about it. Mold was a big thing in the late 90s and 2000s because at least in our code here was you put poly on the walls in a basement, they'd sweat, it would cause water everywhere. Then all your pink insulation would turn to black mold, and then you'd open up the walls and you had a mold issue. But that
Mhm.
was you. They weren't preventing it. They were waiting to react to it and say, how do we
Right.
fix it? And
Mhm.
I get you don't know what you don't know, but why has what we breathe been so slow? And I said, touch. I was listening to one of your podcasts about all the things that you touch.
Mhm.
Tell us a little bit about what we touch and what we breathe and how, because ultimately, the people listening to this podcast are builders. We have to inform our homeowners. Like the
Right.
zealous homeowner who has a rare disease, or I actually had a homeowner that wore two P98 masks or whatever during COVID because he had a very so it's because of him that we did ultraviolet HEPA filters because he's, if I get sick, I'm going to die.
Mhm.
I really had to react to my client, but I feel like builders, we should have some education to educate our clients of why they should care about some of this.
Yeah, that's a tough one to talk about because for years it frustrated me that the building community just didn't want to start discussing these things. It's everybody knew it was the elephant in the room that nobody want to talk about. And I realized if you are a builder who has been building homes for 50 years, your firm's been building homes for 50 years, and now tomorrow you start advertising, we can build healthy homes. What does that say about the thousands of homes you built prior to that? That tells the world that all those homes were toxic. And I don't mean they were, but the perception is, oh no, you're doing healthy, which means they were unhealthy before. So it's a fine line that the building community has to walk on this. I work with a lot of builders that are, I don't want to say they're startups, but they've started up completely separate entities from their traditional firms because they don't ever want people to look back and say, yeah, but what about that house
Oh,
and that
interesting.
house? It's the idea like there's a giant manufacturer of insulation, of fiberglass insulation, about 10 years ago, came out with a formaldehyde-free version of their insulation, and when they launched it, they started getting threatened lawsuits because they were saying, "It's formaldehyde-free, no longer does it have this stuff in it," and people were like, "Yeah, but my house has had this for 40 years. So now you're
Right.
telling me you can make it formaldehyde-free?" So they instantly came out with all these full page ads in the trade pubs saying, we didn't do it because of any perceived health issues with formaldehyde. It's perfectly fine. We did it because there are better products to use now. It's like the tobacco industry kind of, looking back and saying maybe it wasn't a good idea that we had doctors smoking on advertisements. And it is tough to make the switch without the fear of people saying, but why didn't you do it earlier? People always want to find somebody to blame.
That's true. Obviously, a manufacturer of a product might be different, but like for me, like you don't know what you don't know. I
Oh,
think
of course.
a big part of the podcast, and certainly one of my main goals, obviously want to educate. We want to entertain people too, because
Mhm.
people want, you could educate people and they won't listen because it's not funny or interesting and all that. But like we education, a huge part of why you're on here today, I assume, is
Mhm.
to educate.
Yeah,
And
for sure.
I bet you could keep remaking the circuit because everyone's audience is different. The vast majority don't know, don't care, and don't need a reason to care.
Lake Society magazine is Minneapolis' premier target market boutique lifestyle and design publication. It embodies the unique lifestyles and design of the Minneapolis City Lakes neighborhoods. From Lake of the Isles to Lake Harriet, it showcases the best in local design projects by both premier builders, architects, and interior designers in this area. Lake Society magazine has the look and feel of a national publication with glossy covers, high-end finishes. It's mailed directly to upper bracket single-family homeowners in the City Lakes area, and it's the perfect local coffee tabletop publication. Subscriptions can also be available through the website lakesocietymagazine.com. Additionally, publisher and founder Karen Steckel has over 27 years in the local magazine publishing industry and has a passion for high-end photography and quality graphics. Her commitment to quality, visual simplicity, and beauty are strongly reflected in her beautiful Lake Society magazine.
This episode is brought to you by Adaptive. For over 2 years now, I've been using Adaptive. It's an incredible game changer. It's AI technology based. It helps you with bill pay. And as a builder, there's very few things that anger our subs more than not being paid on time. Well, those days are gone. Not only do you know exactly where you are, but you can pay people through your ACH channels, making draws extremely quick. With one click of a button, which used to take hours, my office staff is now able to generate a draw to the bank or to the client in literally seconds. The thing that I appreciate the most about Adaptive is their ability to keep changing. We've given them 3 or 4 feedbacks on the things that we need as builders, and within just a few months, they're rolling those things out. This is saving us hours per week and days per month in terms of our efficiency. If you're looking to upgrade your business, I'd highly recommend Adaptive. You can reach out to them at adaptive.com or listen to the Curious Builder podcast, episode 15 or episode 80, where we dive into their origin story.
Roughly 25% of the population has a genetic predisposition for severe mold sensitivity. And that's now been proven through genetic testing over the last 7, 8 years. I've been saying for years that about 25% of the population has a chemical sensitivity. And now we're finding that it's the same. Now, that means that 1 out of 4 in a household will be affected more so by mold, chemicals, possibly electromagnetic fields. The rest of the family is going to say, no, that's just so and he or she, they just have allergies. They're always kind of a sickly person. Well, no, it's a genetic thing. The other thing is, while 75% of the population may not have that genetic predisposition, I would say that 100% of the population that lives in housing, whether it's apartments or homes today, they are affected. We all are affected by the materials in our homes. Most people have the ability to filter, and you talked about this before. It's amazing how our bodies can filter out the toxins. Our lungs can get rid of the crud. A lot of it has to do with just getting a good night's sleep every night. One of the things I talk about with all my clients is if you're going to build or remodel a home to be healthy, make the bedroom the safest room in the
That's
house. You got to get 6 to 8 hours of sleep, of restorative sleep every single night. And if you're inundated with chemicals from the carpeting, from EMFs coming from the wires behind the wall, you're not going to get that restorative sleep. Couple all this information with something so there's a Dr. Shoemaker who's a mold expert. He's written the protocol on mold detox. He was on a show recently, and he was saying that studies are showing that 75% of homes in the United States are affected by water damage. 75%. And it's obviously because of the building materials we use. You talked about vapor barriers in the walls. And the problem is with the vapor barrier that most companies use, it allows transmission both ways. So now moisture inside of the home can go back into the cavity wall. And then in the middle of winter can turn to frost and then it melts. And then we have a mold problem in spring. And so there are new methods out there to build our homes to be breathable from a moisture standpoint, airtight from an energy efficient standpoint. And this is where I said earlier, I'm so excited about where our industry is right now because we're finally getting it. We're not using these adages like, oh, a house needs to breathe. No, the occupants of the house need to breathe. The house could care less. But from a standpoint of air infiltration, you want it to be airtight. From moisture, you want it to be able to allow that moisture to breathe in and out so it doesn't get locked anywhere. Combined with a piece of moldy wood or a mold spored infected wood turns into a mold factory. So these are the things that are coming out now. And I think this is really at the breaking point. And what I mean by that is there's been so much momentum in our industry now over the last 4, 5, 6 years that it has to take off now. If we revert back to our old ways of how we build houses in the United States, it's just going to be an ongoing problem. And so I'm very excited of getting phone calls and emails from builders and building experts across the country who are now reaching out and saying, I want to do this. I want to learn more. And so this is a perfect opportunity.
It is interesting how energy efficiency helps healthy buildings, and healthy buildings can help energy efficiency. Sometimes they combat. Obviously, sometimes they're not the same. I know maybe we should talk about spray foam a little bit.
Mhm.
A lot of people think spray foam is the end all be all to everything. It's not. I think I've heard one energy expert say in its proper application, it's a great tool. And I think it's a little bit like a surgeon's scalpel is exactly what you need when you're doing open heart surgery, not a chainsaw. But if you're cutting down a tree, a scalpel is going to do you no good. You need a
Mhm.
chainsaw. Like, it's a different tool for a different job.
It
Would you
is.
agree with that statement when it comes to spray foam?
100%. I think that spray foam insulation, there are certain situations on project I'm working on where we just say we have to use it here because we have no other choice. I rarely would recommend it on a project unless the project has gone along too far. Like, we already know what our wall thicknesses are going to be. We know we have this energy code we're trying to meet. So we just don't have any other options here. Spray foam it's 100% plastic and doesn't breathe, even though it does lead to problems with moisture down the road because of the divorcing of the foam to the wood and leads to a channel of air and water coming through. But from the bigger standpoint is I have helped numerous clients over the years completely remediate their homes because the spray foam never fully cured, or it cured incorrectly and it was nothing but a toxic soup from that point on. So they had to ice blast all the walls to get rid of any residual of it, and I just don't want to go there.
Oh, wow, I've never heard that. Ice blast? Tell me about
Mhm.
that. That's
Yeah,
interesting.
ice blasting is essentially taking
Oh, like liquid nitrogen or
liquid
something?
nitrogen and essentially freezing the surface so that
Wow.
all of that can be scraped out properly. Otherwise, it's hard to get it out of the cavities.
Sounds
It
super cheap and easy to do.
Oh, yeah, very, yeah. It doesn't take any time at all, and in the meantime, you got somebody paying a bill to be in a hotel for 6 months,
Oof.
and these are usually people who already have a compromised immune system, and so now we have to put them into a hotel, which there's no such thing as a healthy hotel. It's just an ongoing thing, so that's why I like to get involved in a project early on so we can make these decisions early, so we're not having to make a quick decision because we didn't have time to integrate healthier opportunities.
So with spray foam, I've heard before, correct me if I'm wrong, and I know it's a compound of two chemicals being sprayed at the one time. So a lot of it is being mixed in the field, which is why there's a lot of volatility to it, right? Because you could have a good product, but if it's applied wrong or incorrectly, depending on the temperature, there's a lot of variables with
A
spray
lot of
foam.
variables.
One of them I've heard is you should only do, is it 2 or 3 inch lifts at a time, because that allows it to cure an off gas and heat, right? So if you're
Sure.
doing it within, let's say, 3 inches or less, I think that's the protocol. Then they come back like the next day. Let's say you're doing a 6 inch, let's say it's a lid or something like that.
Yeah.
You would do 3 inches, let it cure, let it air out for 24 hours or whatever, then come back and do a secondary one. Is that the proper way to handle that for those that do a lot of spray foam?
Sure. So there's obviously a difference between open cell and closed cell and their expandability, expansion capabilities, and time frame. You're always making sure you're following manufacturer's suggestions so you don't void any warranties. But keep in mind that spray foam is always A part B, and both part A and part B are made up of dozens of different chemicals. And you are asking a skilled crew, but sometimes not accurate, to go into the field, whether it's 90 degrees outside or 30 degrees outside, whether it's 80% humidity or 20% humidity, and you're spraying cavities. And it's not like you're spraying on a finish on a 63 split window Corvette. This is not a $200,000 car that they're spraying that one little mar is going to ruin the finish. This is, let's just get it in that cavity and move on. And so when you watch them spray, you'll notice there are many areas where they don't spray it on enough, or they spray on too much. It expands too much, not enough. And they go over the top of it, as you said, with the next lift. This is not scientific. All the calculations that are done with spray foam and with just about any other liquid material that we use on site, all the calculations and suggestions, their MSDS and so forth, their certifications, they're all done based upon laboratory settings. And as well as I do, that no job site is a laboratory setting.
That-
And so you're asking for a scientific material to be
Yes.
applied in the
Here's
field.
a here's an analogy for you. You're doing open heart surgery on a jet ski in the ocean.
Exactly, exactly. And I know these crews, they're good at what they do, but they're not scientists. They're not chemists.
So that being said, should people try to design away from spray foam? Would that be
Yes,
your yeah, there you go.
100%.
So one of the things that we're doing, and part of it's our climate, is we're doing as much external insulation as we can.
Yeah.
There's a number of different manufacturers. We use Zip. Most of what we've been doing is Zip 6, but actually, and we'll speak about this maybe the last 20 minutes about things that I'm doing on my home, and you can run lab on it. But we're doing an R12, which is
Mhm.
significant. So, but my original plan before talking to you would be to do an R12 to the outside and do like a 1 inch or 2 inch spray just for air sealing on the inside, and that's it. Is
Yeah.
that a good idea or not a good idea?
I look at it a couple of ways. First of all, what did we do as an industry before spray foam?
We had bat insulation and poly or bib insulation, or
Yep.
I know you like mineral. I like mineral too. So
Love
if
mineral.
whatever I can do, if I could do mineral bib, great. And then we would do poly or a smart perm poly, and and then spray foam really came around. It seems like in my experience because it didn't. Maybe it was there in the very beginning, but it's we didn't have enough space. We needed density, or you had those weird corners where it's just I can't get the bat to do what I need it to do,
Right.
and I need insulation there, so we're going to spray foam it.
Yeah, and so that's exactly right. And so the reason why I ask that question is that people always say, "What are we going to do if we can't use spray foam?" Well, what did we do 20 years ago when we didn't have spray foam? The problem we have now is I look at this as the unintended consequence of trying to do the right thing. We are trying to build our homes more energy efficient. I love that idea. Obviously, we all do. Nobody wants to pay more than they have to for energy, and and from an environmental standpoint, it's the correct thing to do. Now, how are we going to do that if we still want these tight corners? We still want cathedral ceilings, and we have very small amount of insulative area. We have to think about the way we design our homes around insulation that's not toxic. And I love the idea of doing insulation on the outside of the wall. I think that continuous insulation is probably more beneficial than in between the studs. I'm not
I
an energy
I
expert, but
think it is. No, it
yeah.
is. It will be, in my opinion, one of the biggest revolutions, a big word.
Mhm.
It's evolutionarily from the building process. So I think will be one of the biggest game changers
Yeah.
that our industry has seen in decades.
Yeah.
And it's already here, but the adoption of it in our climate, it's becoming more, it's going to be close to code.
Mhm.
And we always struggle with, I don't know what's going to happen in the middle parts of the country and the
Right.
South either. We've been forced to because of our cold. But obviously it still makes a lot of sense in, let's say you're in Arizona, it's 120 degrees. Cooling, AC cooling is very expensive in
Yeah.
terms of energy
Yeah.
consumption. If you're home, you can get to net zero with this kind of stuff. And so I think that's really going to lead the initiative. Obviously, that from the health quality, I guess one of my questions, so we don't spend the whole time talking about insulation, is how do you test your home? I think a lot of people, we do a lot of remodels. I'm thinking of what you just said right now. If you're sleeping whatever percent of your life in your master bedroom or owner's bedroom or your kid's bedroom, like it used to always be, we build luxury homes in the 2 million to 5 million range. And we'll just keep it for that for this because that's what I do, but not everyone does that. But my point is, usually in our market, everything is hardwood, finished on site wood. And then the second level and the basement would usually be carpet. I have tried to do whatever I can to get wood on all levels. And just because I'd rather see the dust bunny so I can vacuum them up. And I've
Right.
seen videos of what grows in carpet, and you're just like, oh, the amount of bacteria and gross and stuff in there is pretty repulsive. And but I was thinking like most people save money in their kids' bedrooms. I've never, but it's usually a cost discussion.
Right.
I'm sure if you presented it in a way, not totally terrible, but hey, I understand you're trying to save some money, but like how important is your kid's health to you? I've never phrased it that way. I'm going to now after having talked to you, but just expound a little bit on the materiality of what we're using in our homes.
Sure. 90% of the chemical toxicity issues that you'll face inside of a home will come from the things you see and touch on a daily basis. Flooring is number one. In anybody's home, flooring has the biggest potential for chemical release.
Why is
And
that?
because of, first of all, the area. If you're building a $3 to $5 million home, and you're probably looking at, let's say, 5,000 square feet, you have 5,000 square feet of material that can off gas for 30 to 40 years. And let me just step back and say people use the term off gassing and curing interchangeably, and that they shouldn't. Curing is the process of the liquid component turned into a solid. For instance, if you're doing site finish polyurethane on a hardwood floor, it takes 7 to 10 days to reach a full cure. Now it's fully cured. Now is when off gassing begins. Off gassing is the release of unreacted chemical monomers that'll never become part of the coating or part of the substrate. And that can last anywhere from 3 to 5 years up to 30 to 40 years.
Wow. And how toxic is that, or it depends on the chemical?
It depends on what is actually releasing. For instance, the biggest thing that I worry about is formaldehyde. Formaldehyde is a key trigger for people with allergies, asthma, chemical sensitivities. It's anybody who has any type of depressed immune system, formaldehyde can be a real problem. And so we're trying to find materials that are either low or zero in formaldehyde release. The problem is that you get a polyurethane coating that gets applied to wood, and you can look at the safety data sheet, and it won't say formaldehyde on it. They may even say it doesn't contain formaldehyde because formaldehyde hasn't been in coatings since 1982 or something like that. But manufacturers use what are called formaldehyde donors or precursors. And so as it cures, the chemical curing process creates formaldehyde to help with flow rate or curing or a mildicide. It works great as a mildicide. It's a byproduct or a derivative of flame retardants. And so we look at that, and something like plywood subfloors, and this is getting better now, but most plywood subfloors up to about the last 10 years have emitted great deals of urea formaldehyde, which is going to last anywhere from 30 to 50 years because it doesn't have a lot of exposure to release. So it releases slowly, and it releases from a very thick amount of material. A paint that goes on a wall, it's only an off gas for about 3 to 5 years. And I say only because it's a tenth of the plywood, but those chemicals can emit off of that coating for 3 to 5 years after it reaches a full cure. And this is even if you buy what's called a zero VOC paint. And that's a whole 60-minute discussion right there. Is I don't look for products that are low or zero in VOC, because when it comes to the human occupants, VOCs are irrelevant. VOCs are regulated because of outdoor air pollution. That's the only reason why manufacturers use low or zero VOC additives in their materials. The fact that some VOCs are dangerous for humans, that exists. It's also true that out of the 92,000 chemicals that are used in building materials and home goods, only a few hundred of them are actually classified as VOCs. So if a product is considered zero VOC, but is still toxic, that tells you that the VOC is not the issue. It's the toxicity of the ingredient. And I'll give you an example. If anybody in the audience is familiar with acetone, which is nail polish remover, acetone, if used in paints and coatings, the EPA says zero VOC. How can that be? It's a highly toxic solvent, an extremely dangerous solvent. Matter of fact, if you take a can of acetone into a high school and you open it up in one room, within 15 minutes, every child in that entire high school have detectable levels of acetone in their liver. In 15
What?
minutes.
No way.
Yes. But in paints and coatings, the EPA says, oh yeah, you can use it. You can use it. You don't even have to disclose it, because the EPA looks at VOCs because of the fact that they react with nitrogen and UV to create low-level smog. Acetone is not photocatalytic, so it will not create smog. Therefore, the industry has lobbied enough to allow the use of acetone in their materials and not have to disclose it.
Wow.
So now think of the fact that zero VOC, right? Everybody looks for the VOC content. If you woke up this morning for breakfast, you had an orange, you sliced an orange, peeled it, you've released 850 grams per liter of VOCs. Does that mean that the orange is toxic? Of course not. So we have to look at things differently. We have to look at
That's
the
so
ingredient.
funny without you educating me on that. Anytime if a painter told me, is it water-based, is it low VOC or no VOC, they'd say yes. And in my mind, I'm thinking, I'm doing a great job. I'm providing something that's really, because I just don't know. I would say the majority of people don't know.
No, you're right. And this is where it harkens back to when I first started the company, when I first had my own crew going to the hospital because we thought water-based was safe. Now, people are getting lulled into the sense of security thinking that zero VOC means safe.
Right.
And it's not true.
Are
Have
you
to
saying
look
that
at-
even water-based finishes, so like water-based floor, like we do a 5-inch white oak solid and we sand and coat it with a white oak, or sorry, with a water-based sealer.
Sure.
Now I'm gonna have to ask him what's in that
Well,
water-based sealer.
water-based in the industry only means that 50% of the liquid component is water. The rest can
Gotcha.
be whatever they want it to be.
Sure.
And because of the VOC regs, they can't use xylene anymore or toluene. So now they're using things like ammonia, which is not a VOC, acetone, butyl acetate, and other derivatives that they can say, oh, we use acetone. No, we use such and such a chemical name that is acetone, but it doesn't say acetone.
This it's actually, this came up recently. I forget where I heard this, but I heard you say a version of this as well. But that basically everything is a poison depending on the dose. For
Mm,
instance, oxygen, too much
yep.
oxygen will kill you.
Yes.
Too much hydrogen will kill
Yeah.
you. Too much water will kill you. Pretty
Mhm.
much anything will kill you in the wrong dosage. So everything
Yes.
is a poison. So it's funny because as a dad of 3 children, obviously I'm very sensitive to like what is poison, trying to teach our
Sure.
kids, but awareness of, and we make lots of decisions without, okay, or I've done this long enough and there's been no issue, so I'll keep doing it.
A lot of that out there.
It's a lot. It's very overwhelming. Even I'm sure people listening right now, if they're still here, are probably like, man, do I have to be an expert like Andy? How am I going to continue to build? One of my questions is, and maybe this is what your business does, are there checklists or pre-approved lists where somebody like myself, who's not a deep research analyst or cares to be, but I do care about the health,
Mhm.
like how can we as builders educate ourselves and others in a way where we're relying on scientists or people like yourself to basically say, hey, here's some great guidelines. Maybe it's not
Sure.
everything, but hey, 70, 80, 90% improvement is a huge movement. Is that a
Yep.
common question that you get? And is that even something you can do?
Yeah, it's very common. I've started writing a book about 10 times in the last 20 years, and I always stop because by the time I get to chapter 2, chapter 1's obsolete. I know I have a lot of friends in the industry. I've written books on the subject, and I write for several publications. The thing is that, um, we can't treat everybody the same. And what is maybe problematic for one person is no big deal to the next. And so we run into trouble when we try to find a blanket recommendation that's good for everybody. You mentioned LEED before. LEED for Home started many years ago, and they found that people who had allergies and asthma would walk into a LEED platinum home and have to walk out within minutes because of the toxic off gassing. Then it comes down to, I thought you said this is a greenhouse. We did. What does green mean? Green means energy efficient, and it means that we use some recycled content flooring material or carpet that was made from partially from corn cobs or whatever it was at the time. So I think we have to look at things like, yeah, there are things we can do as an industry to just make all the homes overall safer, and most of that has to do with the structural things, that 10% behind the walls, under the floors, above the ceilings that we don't see. That's what the industry needs to get better at. That last, the 90%, the things you can see and touch, this is going to be more specific from customer to customer, which is why my career really has been now working with customers one-on-one as an architectural design consultant. Now I work with some contractors, and I help all of their customers through doing Zoom calls and how do we get their home to be just a little bit safer. Maybe they don't have health issues that they're worried about right now, but they just want to protect themselves, future proof, just in case somebody develops a health issue down the road that depresses the immune system. So it's tough. It's really tough to say, here's a checklist that'll work for everybody, because it's not possible. Somebody's going to react. So we have to look at things on an individual basis, which is why I do so much work with custom home builders across the country, because you're used to having a customer that you meet with and has a Pinterest page with 1,400 pictures
Mhm.
of the same kitchen saying, build me this.
Right.
And you're like, yeah, I can do it. We can do this. We'll figure this out. So customers who want a healthy home, that's essentially the same thing. And the good builders that I work with will say, I'm not exactly sure how we're going to achieve this right now, but we can achieve this. We'll work together, work with Andy, we'll get this taken care of.
This episode is brought to you by Pella Northland. For 20 years, I've been using Pella windows, and I couldn't be happier to call them as a business partner, a trade partner, and someone that really supports us in our quality builds. We use wood windows and doors on every single one of our homes, and 98% of every home that I've ever built has been a Pella window. I've gotten to know their team here locally as well as nationally, and the way that they support us as a craftsman, as well as they support our homeowners with their lifelong guarantee, has actually been a game changer for me. So when people ask me who I use, I recommend Pella. If you want to hear more about Pella's story, you can listen to episode 1, where I interview Peter and Ed from Pella Northland about their journey into the Pella ownership. One of the, and we might have to have you back on to go specifics on some of this stuff, but I guess there's a, as we wind down here for the next 20 minutes, my original idea of to workshop through this spec home I'm doing probably isn't going to work because there's going to be too many questions back and forth. I just want to hit up a few things that you came on. One was like MDF. We
Yeah.
do all custom cabinetry, and let's say in our specific market, we'll do mostly painted cabinets. The big wide panels tend to be MDF because they don't shrink and crack, and they're also cost effective. We're seeing obviously a pretty big resurgent in stained woods, white oak, things like that. How I had mentioned MDF has glue in it. And is MDF healthy to breathe, not healthy to breathe? And what alternatives are there when we talk to our cabinet shop and say, hey, this house is going to paint custom cabinets, inset, blah, blah, blah. We're meeting that 120 design bullet points in their Pinterest page,
Mhm.
but now I have to hit their health requests. And
Yeah.
what do I say about MDF?
Sure. So before I get to MDF, I'll just say that obviously the goal is to design and build a home that is healthy, but also meets their aesthetic and their price point and all the other factors that they have. And it really comes down to early on in the project, probably in the design phase, to understand that sometimes you may have to give a little to get a little.
Yep.
There is no perfect project. There's no perfect product. In the 30 plus years of doing this, I have never done the perfect project because it's impossible. So if somebody says, I really want 10-inch wide white oak floors, but I want it to be chemical free, free of any off gas and whatever, I'm going to tell them it's impossible because 10-inch wide white oak, you're going to have to do at least a glue assist nail down or a full spread, and you can't find non-toxic glue. So sometimes you have to talk them off of that and say, maybe do a 5-inch so we don't have to glue it down. When it comes to cabinetry, MDF, when it any cabinetry, you've got two issues. One is the substrate, whether it's MDF or plywood, and the other is the finish. There are um, urea formaldehyde free MDFs on the market now. And I distinct that because there's urea formaldehyde, there's phenol formaldehyde. Urea formaldehyde is the one we really concern ourselves with because that's the one that becomes airborne. That is the carcinogen of formaldehyde. Phenol formaldehyde or phenolic resin is about 200 times less likely to ever become airborne, but phenol formaldehyde is also moisture resistant. So if you are using Vantec subfloors, that's actually an OSB made with phenol formaldehyde. I don't worry about that because phenol formaldehyde has an off gas.
That's so funny. I literally had written down here to check with Advantech to see what their product was made of. So now you've saved me a phone
There
call.
you
Thank
go.
you.
So now when it comes to MDF, there's a company called Medex that makes a phenol formaldehyde MDF. So
What was the name of that company?
Medex, Medex is the product. And Medex is it's going to be it's still made with a formaldehyde, but a phenol formaldehyde. So now I'm not worried about it. I'm more concerned about that product just from a standpoint of cutting because wood dust itself, even though it's natural, wood dust can be very, very dangerous for people with allergies and asthma. And now we're dealing with the finishes. The finishes are what are most likely to lead to long-term off-gassing when it comes to cabinetry. Painted finishes ultimately are safer than stained and clear coat because just the nature of stains and clear coats, they incorporate a lot more formaldehyde typically, where paints don't have that much. When I do testing of cabinetry for formaldehyde off gassing, painted cabinets always come in at least 50% lower than the stained cabinets.
Wow,
So off the bat,
that's a
yeah,
huge number.
it is.
And
But
would these be finished on site, or most of these would be factory finished you're referring to?
either it's just across the board, painted will always be about 2 times better than stained and cleared. Now, from that, it's still off gas. Painted cabinetry can off gas for 5 years and can be very, very dangerous. Even though it's paint, it's still off gassing. So that company I talked about earlier, AFM Safecoat, they actually make cabinet finishes that do not off gas. So we work with some really high-end cabinetry companies that they will actually build their cabinets unfinished. And so, matter of fact, we work with Crystal up in your neck of the woods,
Yeah.
and they'll make their cabinets unfinished. We'll ship them down to the job site in Texas, and then we have the local painter or finisher use the AFM safe coat to make sure that the system is completely safe, the boxes and the finish.
That's how we do it here. I mean, our homes, I have everything installed raw, mainly because I'm pretty picky on how my crown details look, and
Sure.
I want the enamel to be perfect. But that's just another reason
Yep.
now just to look into the AFM Safe Code. How you'd mentioned a little before about floor hardwood, solid surfaces are going to be probably your best. Stay away from carpets. But are there, like, usually in basements, people do like a wool carpet? Are
Mhm.
most wools going to be safe to breathe and for off gassing? Walk us through some of, obviously there's a lot of people listening that are like,
Right.
wait, think of how loud it is. If the whole house is wood, it's going to be an echo chamber. Then you're either buying rugs, which now you have the same problem as before, or handwritten. There's, yeah, a myriad of choices that happen. Are
So
there some carpets that are acceptable?
yes, there are. And to your point about the whole house being loud, here's an example of a project. It was actually up in the Twin Cities. A customer contacted me because the family installed 4,000 square feet of hardwood flooring in this house. And within a couple of months, everybody in the house gets sick. And they went back to their builder. They talked to some indoor air quality experts up in Minnesota, and nobody could figure it out. And somebody pushed them over to me. I drove up there and I tested all the wood. It was completely free of off gassing. But then I looked around, I noticed they have area rugs all over the house because of all these hardwood floors. I started testing area rugs, and the area rugs were off-gassing toxic levels of formaldehyde, like 10 times the limit of just being relatively safe. And I told them that, "Let's take all the area rugs out, put them in the garage or put them outside." And so I drove home, 6-hour drive. I get home, I have an email from the customer saying, "We are feeling better already."
Wow.
So yes, you have to be careful of that. So how do I look at this? Carpeting is generally safer than plastic carpeting. And I say generally because obviously the fiber itself is natural. The brand or the quality level doesn't really matter here. There are some really good quality wool carpets that are $150 a square yard that are still dangerous because they're using pesticides, moth proofers, so they don't get a moth infestation in the warehouse. They're using chemical dyes. And once they use all that process, they may even have to add in flame retardants. The backing typically contains styrene butadiene rubber, which releases a lot of formaldehyde. There is a brand out there called Earthweave. They're out of Dalton, Georgia, where all carpet's made. But Earthweave actually makes carpeting that is completely synthetic chemical free. It's wool fibers, no pesticides, no chemical dyes. The backing is hemp, jute, cotton, and held together using natural latex right from the rubber tree. So they'll do wall to wall. They'll also do area rugs. So we use them now mostly for our projects that require carpeting, but you have to be careful in a basement, as you said, because basements generally are a little bit higher humidity. You have to worry about moisture vapor.
Mm.
So we always want to make sure we're testing vapor pressure before we do wool down there because you don't want to have wool staying damp long because now it could lead to moth problems.
How often are, well, and maybe this transition a little bit here to your business. Do builders like myself, do they contract you to help them on an hourly basis to help source some of this stuff? Or like, how would somebody like myself work? Yeah, I don't actually know. Are you mostly an educator? Are you supplying the materials that people are coming from? How is it that your business, other than education, sort of interacts with people on a different level? Obviously, you have this healthy home concierge. Is that sort of that platform?
It started off years ago as just selling materials, and I learned enough about the issues and about the products, and it got to the point where people around the country would call up and say, "I know you don't sell aluminum windows, but can you help me find the best window that's out there?" And it got to where I was spending literally hours a day answering questions about things that I don't sell and I don't profit on. And therefore, it was making it difficult to have employees. And I finally said, I'm going to be a consultant, but I'm still going to sell materials. I work on a basis of appointments with homeowners mainly. They can book me for a 15-minute call. They can book me for an annual platform where it's unlimited time. But now it's turning into I work with a homeowner who hired a contractor, and now that contractor is now my one of my annuals just ongoing for their projects because they're finding that the more they know and the more they can incorporate into their projects, they're getting more referrals because people are saying, and this is the reason why, if you, for any of the builders that are listening right now, I'm sure many of them are saying, listen, nobody asked me about this stuff. Nobody ever comes to me and asks me to build a healthy home. They're not worried about this or not that. I understand that. But keep in mind that maybe you've never gotten a phone call about this asking, because the potential customers already know that you don't do it and you're not even open to it. And so once you do it, and once you say to yourself, this is not rocket science, it can be done fairly easily. Just listen to the right people and use the right materials and take your time with the educational process. They're finding a whole new market of customer base that they never
Because
had before.
that's how I'm looking at it right now. I'm looking at it as offense, not defense. I'm like,
Right.
the number of people that talk about this is I can think of one. And so now I'm thinking like, man, do you want to be a little minnow in an ocean or do you want to be the whale in the pond? Yeah, I want to take offensive on this and bring it to the forefront for sure. One of the questions I had for you is, and this kind of goes with at least a lot of the information that we're seeing in the from electric vehicles to electric, everything's electric now. There's a whole nother podcast about how electric is created, and there's multiple ways to do that. But for instance, if you're going all electric appliances, I know
Mhm.
that, for instance, I read something years ago about gas. Just most of the stuff we're doing is, let's say, a Wolf Sub Zero range or a gas
Right.
range from whatever manufacturer, that even when you're burning it, it's still only burning at 80-90% efficiency. There's still 10% of carbon monoxide or where the off product of is that you're breathing, and it leads to asthma, all other things. And so one of the benefits of going all electric, especially if you're doing like convection or conduction, you don't have that transfer, you don't have that off gassing of happening. You mentioned though, yeah, explain at what point do we have to worry about too many electric things in our house, and maybe just shed a little light on that.
Yeah, there is a whole science of EMF mitigation, electromagnetic fields that come from our wiring, from our electrical equipment, that come from Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, all that. And I think we're really at infancy stage of this, but we do know that there are a lot of folks who have mold sensitivity and chemical sensitivity also have sensitivity to EMFs. And we do know that electromagnetic fields, if they're close enough to you, will disrupt the REM sleep cycle. So it makes it difficult to have a good night's sleep. Now, when it comes to the idea of going all electric, I'm fine with that, provided that A, nobody in the household has an electromagnetic sensitivity. B, you have a backup plan for, like, you're in Minnesota, I'm in Wisconsin. We lose power once in a while because of ice storms and snowstorms. What are you going to do? What's your backup plan? I got a customer right now in Georgia who's designing a home, and they're not bringing any gas to the land. They want to go all electric, but he wants to be able to have a backup generator. I said, powered by what? So now he has
Well,
to bring in a propane tank.
there's a number of ways to, not a number, I guess I only know of one. We had Paul Crumrich on from Greenway Solar,
Sure.
and they were talking about the Tesla power walls, essentially giant batteries. Now, they're great for a couple days and they're very expensive. If this was a long-term outage,
Mhm.
I'm not sure if that's really viable. In a city setting, probably fine. But like obviously what happened in, was it Ashton, North Carolina, or obviously I don't know what's happening in terms of LA in terms of like power
Mhm.
outages. But gas, to your point, whether it's propane, we have up until these Tesla power walls have had a lot of clients that have pools. And because our climates are cold in the winter, let's say they have a hot tub, we
Mhm.
will do a backup gas generator so that should the power go out for
Right.
even for a short period of time, they can have a circulator pump still working on their hot tub. Otherwise, you might have to that freezes and bursts the
Yeah.
pipes.
Yeah.
Underground hot tub, you might look at 50 grand. Generator is anywhere from 12 to 25 grand, depending on how many things you want to power. It's pretty
Mhm.
reasonable insurance.
Right.
And so, anyway, what's your thoughts
Well,
on?
I guess my thought here is that we can't do things. This goes back to having a checklist. We can't do things that should be blanketed for everybody. I have too many clients that have electromagnetic field sensitivities, and so induction tops specifically are far worse for you than the old-fashioned coil range tops. Far worse, because when you touch the handle of a pot, you become part of the circuit, and so it can be very problematic.
Interest?
And to your point about gas and what doesn't get combusted, or the combustion that gets into the house, if you look at all the studies that are out there about how bad for us, and I'll use it in air quotes, bad for us natural gas is, especially when it comes to cooktops, they never take in consideration the fact that maybe the people who are using it aren't using a range hood, they're not using a range hood properly, or they just don't have one. The proper use of a gas stove is when you go into the kitchen to start preparing your meal, you turn on the range hood. Then you mix things together and then you turn on your range. And it's already creating this current of air that expels out all that junk. Most people start to cook something and they don't turn their range hood on until they see smoke. And that's the incorrect way of using this. We need to teach people how to use their appliances so it's not problematic. The gas stove is not the problem. It's the fact that we don't ventilate properly. So I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater here. I don't want to get rid of gas stoves because what about all those people with electromagnetic field issues? What happens in all these giant developments that are the municipalities are mandating that there's no gas brought to the development? And last year we had a snowstorm in my area, in my subdivision. I had power. People 2 houses down didn't have power for 3 weeks.
3 weeks?
Yeah, in the middle of winter, it was 20 below zero.
Whoa.
If they had a Generac or a Kohler natural gas backup, they'd be fine. But if you're in a neighborhood where it's all electric, what are you doing? And so we need to look at these things and not just we can't do things because it seems to be the right thing to do. We have to look at the consequences, those unintended consequences of trying to do the right thing. We need to
And I
focus on our
I
health
think that's going
first.
back to your earlier statement. There's not one size fits all here. I'm just thinking
Correct.
where I was even going with my current home here that looks like we're gonna have a longer conversation about. But it's basically if I went all electric and had the Tesla walls, I don't have a viable backup should we get a 3-week outage. That's a
Right.
problem. Where if I had a gas furnace and electric storage, I've got
Mhm.
some redundancy there.
Right.
Or vice versa, go all electric and then have a gas Generex or whatever backup ready to
Sure.
go. Then I'm covered. But basically, you've got belt and suspenders, which most builders, that's how they build. Most builders, it's funny how right now I'm asking a lot of questions to try to solve all of this. But in some ways, it shouldn't be as daunting as
No.
maybe a lot of us, or at least what I'm thinking of. Oh man, I got to fix all of these things because most builders do belt and suspenders. It's the reason why you have ice and water and shingles. It's the reason why you have your siding and your cladding and your WRB and all these different things. We're doing multiple things
Right.
to try to, in concert together, work in a way that the homes have longevity and comfort and energy efficiency. And ultimately, I think also we have, and this is obviously totally beyond, you look at the United States, nobody builds homes faster, not saying better, but
Mhm.
faster, in my opinion, than we do in the United States. And I think
Correct.
someone had brought this up post World War II, the baby boom generation, the amount of stick framing we needed was just astronomical. And we have a huge housing shortage now
Mhm.
across the United States. But you go to Europe where they're a little bit more landlocked. And I have a friend of mine who is over in Switzerland, and there's a reason why a lot of their technologies are far advanced to ours. And when I say technologies, it seems like they're way, as a culture, way more interested in doing triple pane long because they're looking at building a home for multiple generations. And
Mhm.
part of that is the average American lives in their house for I think it's 9 to 12 years, something like that. And so
Well,
we don't look at it long enough.
yeah, and that's to that point. Most people don't live in newly constructed homes. They live in a home that was built 200 years ago that's been handed down from generation to generation. The last time I was in Italy, I was staying in a villa that was built in the 1400s and it's still operating as a hotel. And a matter of fact, the count still lived in the basement there. The
Did you
fact
say
is that
the count, like
the count, yeah,
COUNT?
yes,
All
correct.
right. I was
Yeah,
at the yeah, I like this.
yes.
Okay. It's
I
like
think I got a picture.
we don't have enough counts in the United
Yeah, I
States. We
know,
need
I
more,
know.
we need cooler titles.
You're right. And so, yeah, we everything here is fast, efficient, technology laden. For some reason, we all think that all technology is great, and the more the better. And then you look at a home that's built in Europe and the walls are concrete or brick or stone. There's not a lot of wood used in those old structures. Here, what's the oldest standing building in the United States? A house built in Jamestown in the 1600s. They don't last very long compared to Europe because we use materials that are destined for failure. We use materials that are designed to biodegrade. And so I think we need to look at all these materials. If it were up to me, I would get rid of wood in buildings and I would use steel and concrete and glass rock and other things that we know will just last longer because of the environment we have here. But that's not cheap and it's not fast and it's not technology. And so there's a bigger conversation to be had about that. And I tried to have that conversation with clients 20 years ago. Like I was the biggest advocate for insulated concrete form you could find, but I had to stop advocating for it because nobody knew how to do it right. And it was way too expensive. And the industry is not ready for insulated concrete form, even though the ICF industry thinks it is. It's not. we're a traditional stick frame society. We might get to panelized, we might get to SIPs because it's still what we're used to, the similar materials, but just a different way of putting them together. But we're never going to.
It'll be interesting to see over the next, I think with 10,000 baby boomers retire a day. And I don't know the actual stats for housing and labor and all those things, but it's a lot, like any industry. It'd be interesting to see that as we face increased cost of construction, inflation, but labor shortage, will that force us to adopt different framing practices like panelization? And it'd be easy for someone like myself who thinks, hey, I do custom homes. We have to do everything custom one off. That's not true. We've got, I think, Nick Schiffer out in Boston. He's doing a $10 million spec home that he talks all the time about. And the whole thing is panelized.
Wow.
And I think they set the entire thing, like this giant 8,000 square foot house, in 7 or 10 days. So it is possible with design. And I think the other thing that we don't spend enough time on, and even if, I guess it's education, let people do what they want with their own business practice, but like custom home builders have more ability to change and do things like this. I think to really move the needle, you've got to get the nationals on board, right? You've got to get the Lennar, the Pulte's, the DR Hortons, like those guys of the world, because they're outselling us 10,000 units to one.
Sure.
And to really make a cultural change, it has to start there. And they, I would assume, they're obviously responsible to the people who buy it, supply and demand, but a lot of it is cost. And if they can figure out a way to do it, it's going to drastically change a lot of this.
It reduces it for everybody. I'm probably not the one person you want to ask, what do you see? What do you predict? Because I was 20 years ahead of the time. This is not going to happen tomorrow, folks. This is going to happen in 10 years, maybe.
Yeah.
But SIP homes, pre-panelized homes, this is the wave of the future because of the fact that we are losing skilled labor on a very regular basis in our industry. The younger generations don't want to work with their hands as much as we did. I'm saying it's a bad thing. It just is what it is. And so we need to find ways that we can still build really good quality homes, but using less people doing it, less hands putting it together. And I think that you're finding these panel plants popping up all over the country now. And they are doing a really good job because with using computerized design to build somewhat custom homes, but everything's panelized. And so I feel that this is an industry that's just ripe for taking off.
Right. Are you going to be at IBS this year? Maybe. All
I'm
right.
trying to work it out in my schedule.
Ominous. I appreciate very much you coming on the podcast, the time, though, everything that you've shared. We'll have everything in the show notes. We could talk for another hour or two, maybe a week or two. You got a lot of information to go on. Your podcast, I think it's called the Non-Toxic Environments. Is that correct?
That's correct. Non-toxic environments. You can get all those links right from our website, which is thegreendesignCenter.com. From there, you can find links to the non-toxic environments, both on Spotify and iTunes, but also a YouTube show. We're starting up our new season in the next few weeks, I believe. And so look for that coming out soon. And also you'll find a link directly to book an appointment. And I'm not expensive. I do 15-minute calls if you just want to learn how to tile a bathroom shower so you don't have mold problems in the future. That's a 15-minute phone call. Otherwise, if you're doing a large project, that's why I have the annual packages, and I'll be happy to help.
Yeah, that sounds great. Love everything in the show notes. Thanks again for coming on.
Awesome.
And we'll see all the listeners next week.
Thanks, Mark.
We're excited to announce that the Curious Builder collectives are going into 3 other states. For those not familiar with what the collective is, it lives between what the Contractor Coalition is and a Builder 20 group. What we do in each state is we have a group of 25 to 30 builders that get in a room, and you break up into groups of 9. You spend 45 minutes talking about a set topic, whether it's branding, marketing, contracts, whatever that set topic is for that day. And then you talk for 45 minutes, you get up, you mix up the groups and you do it again, and you're out of there. You'll be out in under 3 hours. We're going to be going to Phoenix, Arizona. Brad Levitt is going to be leading a Curious Collective in Phoenix, Arizona. We are going to San Antonio. We've got David and Angela Penske from Penske Homes leading a group down there. And we have Brad Robinson and Vince Longo in Atlanta, Georgia, also leading a collective, as well as obviously me in Minnesota as well for our 2nd annual collective. So if you're interested in collaborating with other builders, if you really want to dive deep on your business in a person-to-person relationship, ask a lot of questions, the collectives are for you. We also have in Minnesota Interior Design Collective, as well as the Architect Collective. Check out the events page at thecuriousbuilderpodcast.com. Thanks for tuning in to the Curious Builder Podcast. If you like this episode, do us a favor, share it with 3 other business owners. The best way that we can spread what we're doing is by word of mouth, and with your help, we can continue to help other curious builders expand their business. Please share it with your friends, like and review online, and thanks again for tuning in.